All right, so before we dive into the world of optimization, I would like to set up a typical scenario. And to give a little bit of background, for many years we've been touting this concept of doing research and backtesting before you go live into the trading markets. And the reason why is because we believe that the markets are always changing. The conditions are always different from year to year. And case in point here, I've got a chart up at the S&P, or actually the spiders, SPY, charted over several years. And as you can see, there are many times where the market's just kind of marching up, but there's also some pullback periods here. And in particular, there's either sideways trading or sort of declining markets, just like we saw during this period here. Okay, so this is the picture I want to paint. We're looking at around 2022 all the way to probably around the almost 2024. Basically just about a 2-year period where the market was sort of trending down and trending sideways. And those are rather challenging periods of time to invest. But for traders who have like a good trade system that trades volatility, those are great times to make money. You can still certainly make money, while investors that sort of buy and hold are maybe not doing so well. And so what I'm going to do is try to find a trade system that works well during this period here of basically sideways to downwards movement. Because the thinking is, if I can find a trade system that works that well in that kind of condition, so the next time I feel like the market is going to go that way, then I can pull out this trade system and start trading that system, knowing that it did quite well in the past under a similar market condition. So one of the things we definitely need to do optimizations is we need some semblance of a trade system to begin with. And that means entries. That also means some sort of order management. So let's start at the basic here. Let's pull up BloodHound, and I've got sort of a mean reversion system, which I believe will do relatively well. So that's kind of my hypothesis, is that I want to find trades that sort of revert to the mean, right? When times of overbought or oversold situations, I'm looking to kind of see the stock, or so rather the instrument, rebound near to the center. And so just gonna pull up the BloodHound logic real quick here, just sort of explain it so that we can understand the different variables that we'll be playing with. So keep in mind, when it comes to optimization, you need sort of a basic system. And then the idea behind that is you use the optimizer to find and hone in on really good values for, say your different indicators. And so what I mean by that, for example, okay, is this is basically a system that has two basic parts to it. It has an EMA filter. And again, because this is a mean reversion system, we are looking at sort of going the opposite direction, if you will, going back to the center or the mean. Therefore, I've got this moving average here. It's an EMA 100 that it's set at. And we're kind of looking at those opportunities when, we're above the EMA. We're looking at short opportunities. And similarly, when we're below the EMA, we're going to be filtering for long opportunities. Okay, so that's sort of the basic filter, but the trigger is really going to be this RSI indicator. And the RSI looks for those situations where we're overbought, oversold in the market. And again, this is the time period that we're sort of interested in examining here. So I've got the RSI in the middle, and that's that blue line here. And I've got this arbitrarily set 70 threshold and this arbitrarily set 30 threshold. And so the point is, I'm looking for those situations where we're in those overbought situations. And so when the RSI pierces this 70 line, I'm going to be looking at short entries. And when it's below the 30 line, I'm going to be looking at long entries. And so those are going to be things that we can play with in the optimizer, right? We can actually move these threshold lines up and down, and we're going to test different threshold levels to see how that affects the performance of the system, right? Because those are going to affect the entries, right? So I've got the RSI plugged in and the EMA plugged into an AND node together, and we see we've got lots of signals here. So actually what I'm going to kind of do here is just eyeball testing this out, right? I'm just looking at here, and I see lots of grouped signals together, right? These are, let's see if you zoom in a little closer, you'll notice that these are multiple bars, right? So we got a chunk of them here, a chunk of them there. And so I'm going to throw in a signal counter that's basically set to, let's just say 2 signals right now before it actually does an entry. Okay, so it's like, are you sure? Are you sure? Okay, now go in. Okay, so that is the entry component. The second component is going to be the order management. And this is actually, I think, a part of the system that tends to be de-emphasized more than it should be. And that's how you manage those trades. And I mean, what I'm talking about is like where you're placing your profit targets and your stop losses. And those are all things you can optimize on too. And those are, in my opinion, probably the more important thing to actually do the optimizations on. But, everybody may have their own opinion. But I think at least that the entries and the order management in terms of where you're putting your profit targets and your stop losses is just as important as picking those entries. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to bring up BlackBird just to show the basic system that I've got here. Okay, and I'm just going to walk you through really quickly the order settings that I've got set up. Because we are dealing with essentially an ETF, which behaves kind of like a stock, we are going to be, no one really buys just only one quote-unquote share, right? So in the SPY, we're going to be looking at 100 shares of the SPY. And then we're going to look at, I've said in this example, a little bit of a scale in, not just something I want to experiment with, but essentially the entry signal is going to be the mean reversion signal that we just saw earlier. But pay attention to this. We're looking at here a profit target set at 2 ATR and a stop loss set at 1.5 ATR. And those are numbers I do want to play with. I want to play with this factor and see what different distances out from the entry do in terms of affecting the profitability of the system. Okay, so that's the basic system right now. And now we can move over to actually doing some optimizations and some experimentations. Okay, to begin, we're going to go to the NinjaTrader control panel, which is right here. And we're going to go to New. We're going to go to Strategy Analyzer. Once that window pops up, and it looks basically just like a spreadsheet, so I'm going to drag it over here so we can take a look at that. We're going to focus on the Strategy Analyzer. I'm going to minimize that just to declutter the screen a bit. You'll see that we have backtest type up here. We got optimization, and we got these are kind of, I would just say these are fancy optimization techniques. But we're going to do just a backtest first, just to kind of get a feel or baseline for what we're looking at here. Okay, so I got BlackBird selected already. I'm going to go ahead and choose my file, my mean reversion file. And then as that pops up, the second thing to do is actually down here. Okay, this is called the selected parameters. So I'm going to go here and open this, and I already selected a few, but let's sort of rewind the clock here, and I'm going to very briefly kind of go over this and tell you what it's for, but then I'm going to go into further detail after we've done about a run or two. Okay, so this here is the dialog that lets you map different things that you had in your BloodHound template and in your BlackBird template to parameters. And these parameters can then be tweaked, and we can try different settings with the optimizer. Okay, so for example, you'll notice I've got my indicators here. I did say there was an RSI. There was also an EMA here. And I got my solvers, the RSI solver, which is, looking at, if you recall, it had those two thresholds, right? The long and the short threshold, 30 and 70. And then I've got comparison solver here. And then more importantly, I've also got those order sets. Okay, so if you recall in the BlackBird template, we had order sets A, B, and C, and then we had that profit target and stop losses at set at 2 ATR and 1.5 ATR. Okay, so I'm just going to select a couple really briefly, and then we'll do a run, and then we'll actually go back into this screen later and explain kind of more in depth how this all works. But I did say that I was interested in looking at this EMA period as a potential thing to optimize on. So what I'm going to do is select the EMA period. Okay, and this is going to let us experiment with different EMAs. Okay, so we got the EMA set to 100, but what if it was 200? What if it was 50? Right? How would that affect the entries and therefore the system performance? Let's find out. Okay, so the other thing I want to play around with for sure is the thresholds. So I want to look at the long and the short thresholds for the RSI. Okay, so that was again the 30 and the 70, right? So the long was at 30, and I'm going to type in kind of something shorter so I can, it's a little easier for me to remember and understand what these are. So this is the short RSI threshold. Let's do the same thing up here. Okay, and I did mention before, I also want to fool around with that ATR. Okay, so in this case, so we got the ATR broken out here into period. We're looking at an ATR 20, and we were looking at 2 times ATR. So that's actually the factor here. Okay, that's a 2 times. Right now the factor is set at 2. So let's see if we can fool around with the profit target factor, ATR factor. Okay, so I'm gonna try more than 2, less than 2, see what happens there. And the stop loss as well, it's at 1.5. Okay, so same idea. I'm gonna go here and put in the this is the profit target ATR, and this is the stop loss ATR. Okay, and hit OK, and immediately they will show up in the backtest as parameters that you can just enter values in. So I'm just going to plug in the original settings here. 30, 70, we were at 2, this was at 1.5, and the EMA was at 100. I'm going to select the spiders. We're going to go on a daily chart in this case. And I sort of said, yeah, we're going to try that period of time where we found it was entering that chop. Okay, so that was probably around 2020. Let's go mid 2021. Okay, let's go in the middle of the year approximately, that's June. And then we're going to go to, let's see, 2023, about June. Okay, so that's about a 2-year period there. And let's just hit run to see what kind of benchmark we'll get out of this. Okay, so it'll take a moment. It's going to spool up the data. It's going to do a run, and then you'll start to see results here. Okay, so there we go. So that's kind of our baseline here, $8,000 of profit between those 2 years trading that particular system. And if I just take a look at the chart here, you can see the entries when they took. Okay, and if we have a little more time, we would probably go over those in detail but anyway, let's get on to the fun stuff next. We're gonna in a moment here, we'll just swap over and try the optimizer. All right, let's switch over to optimization. So to do that, go up here to this top drop down and select optimization, and it's virtually the same. The difference here though is those parameters that I selected are we've now got 3 things we can type in here. Now, what are these? These are the ranges that we're going to try for each particular parameter. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, I did say the long RSI threshold was set at 30, but let's say, for example, we want to try something as low as 20 all the way up to 50. Okay, so that's going to be a range of about 30 different possible values. Now, keep in mind, each one of these values, every time we have a different combination here, we're actually going to be exponentially increasing the number of trials, number of things to test. For example, if I set this one to say something as low as 50 all the way up to 80, that's another 30. Okay, so we got 30 possibilities here, 30 possibilities here. That's a sum total, I mean not sum total, but that's actually 30 squared possibilities. And then if we start adding different possible things to test here, that's going to exponentially increase the number of possible combinations to try. That can add up extremely fast. Before you know it, you could be looking at hundreds of thousands and perhaps millions of trials. And of course, that could take a very long time. But what I recommend is actually set your increment to something more than just 1. And that way it tells the strategy analyzer, don't just pick numbers like 21, 22, 23, 24. Pick them like start at 20, then then go to 30, then to 40, then 50. Okay, so instead of 30 possible values, we're looking at, I think that's if I include 20 and 50, right? So that'd actually be 5, right? So 20, 30, 40, 50. So that's 4 possible values. Okay, so if I do the same thing here, that's 4 possible values down there. So now we're looking at 4 possible values times 4, that's only 16. And you know, if you keep these numbers pretty small, we can keep the number of iterations pretty manageable. All right, so let's keep going here. I want to look at a profit target that's between 1 and let's go crazy. Let's go to 25, but let's increment that by 5. And with the stop loss, I'm going to go a little tighter. My tolerance for risk there is not so high. Let's go from 1 to, let's say, 5 and see how that does. Probably incrementing that by, well, let's just do 2. He'll figure that out, even if it's not an even number. Okay, so the EMA. Okay, let's just try all the way from 50 to 250, but let's go by 50. Or I want to know if this EMA really makes a difference or not. Okay, so again, it's going to try every single possible combination of all these values, and we're just going to hit run and probably speed up the video so that we're not waiting for this whole time. But we got 1,440 possible combinations to try. So imagine the time savings here, right? This is a great time saving tool in terms of you don't have to manually try each and every value and combination individually to come up with these tests, right? So you can have the computer run through them all relatively quickly and spit out the top 10 results in this case, right? So here we go. As you can see, it's actually moving pretty quickly here. Typically, I find the most waiting begins at the very beginning when it's sort of just loading up the data and spooling everything up and spooling all the different threads up because it's going to be running things in parallel and doing those tests. So anything, in the 1,000 range is definitely more than reasonable in terms of being able to run these tests. Okay, so the optimization run is complete. And the first thing we're going to see here is a list of their top 10 results. As you can see, the same 11 trades seem to have been taken under most of these settings. And our profit went up to $20,000, and it looks like there's sort of a second system, right? So what this is, and the reason why we have things that are similar here or exact is it seems like the same trades were taken regardless of these different parameters. And if I click on each one, you can see the actual settings for that particular run. So for example, that first one, it says here the long RSI was set at 20 and the short RSI was set at 70. And the profit target was at 11 and the stop loss was set at 5. The EMA at 150. So let's look at the next one and see what those settings are. Basically the same, except the EMA was 50. And if we go down here, basically the same, except the EMA was set to 100. So that sort of tells me that the EMA is not as an important factor as we thought it was originally. So this is kind of important information you can glean, right? And there's a lot of other things here in the actual performance metrics that you can see here. Some of the things I'd like to point out, and of course, this is where you should spend a lot of your time just sort of in analyzing the effectiveness of your trade system. But you want to look at things like your average losing trade, your largest losing trade, and those are things that at least you can, in your max drawdown is actually similar to that, right? This is what your system did when it wasn't working well, right? And that's important to know because you want to be able to visualize what it's like to trade this particular system. If you have a system with a pretty dramatic drawdown, chances are you might not stick with it, right? And so that's a psychological factor. Perhaps it also is a factor in terms of how stable that system is, right? And then we can also select this thing called analysis. That'll bring up the equity curve as well as the different trades that happened. So I won't go into too much depth here, but all this data is incredibly useful in order to analyze the effectiveness of the trade system. All right, so with that out of the way, let's take a look at a typical workflow. So now that we've sort of determined, okay, the EMA, changing the EMA up may not have been a major factor here, I'm going to make two changes here. The first one I'm going to do is I want to go to BloodHound, and I'm going to add another node. Okay, so for example, I've got this idea that perhaps maybe what happens if we were to throw in another solver called the regression channel position, because this particular one actually is great at filtering out moments where this is actually a great solver in general for mean reversion, right? If you picture the regression channel overlaid on top of the chart, we're looking for those periods where we're kind of at the high part of the regression channel and the low part of the regression channel. We're looking to perform a mean reversion. So let's go ahead and plug that one in. I'm just going to do it blindly, just because it's just a lot easier. And then the second thing I want to do is I want to remove the EMA period. I don't think that really makes a difference. Just take that right out. Now that'll reduce the number of calculations that the optimizer will have to do. Okay, so once I hit OK in there, you'll notice the optimization or the optimizer parameters have now been reduced to just 4. The EMA is no longer there. And keep in mind, I do have that new node in there, the regression channel solver. And just to show you where that is now, let's if I go to the solver list, you can actually see it here now. But I'm not going to play with any of those values. I just plugged it in. I think it's my theory is it'll probably run just as good without any tweaking. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit run now. And again, it's going to take a moment to spool up. And usually the moment you hit run, there's about a 30-second or 10-second kind of delay before you'll see anything in terms of this progress bar growing. So don't be alarmed, just be patient. The last thing you want to do is sort of spam this button as soon as you start clicking it. Like it was originally run, but if you get impatient, hit run, and then you click it a couple times, you're actually going to hit the abort button. So that's just going to spin your wheels. So little tip, just hit it one time, be patient, let it spool up. And I found when I was doing some experimentation that actually if you start doing things like examining not just a single instrument, maybe a basket of instruments, that spool up time actually is even longer. And so a little bit of patience is required. So we're just going to let this run. Okay, it finished. And let's look at the results. And we still have one top result up there. And taking the EMA out, you've noticed now that that's no longer kind of a factor anymore. And so now we have more varied results. This is kind of what we want to see actually. So now we can look at a variety of different settings here. The top choice is still pretty close to what we saw the first time we ran it. But now we're sort of seeing this consistent, not consistent, but a variety of ways we could have won in those situations, right? And so here's another setting here. The second one is gives me a 2070. Those seem to be winning numbers, right? 2070, if we recall from last time, that was the way it is. And I can actually peek at those values up here. If you look at these, these are all pretty much 2070. So 2070 seems to be the 20 setting the long threshold at 20 seems to be sort of the better than setting it at 30, which is great information to have. In terms of the profit target and stop loss, these are pretty wide, right? I think those are, again, probably a result of the market conditions being relatively volatile. We got one here. Oh, this is a one with a stop loss at 1 and 11. That's pretty interesting. Didn't profit as much, but that's pretty nice in terms of risk to reward ratio. Okay, and you got other metrics. You can look at the profit factor, right? So it turns out in these situations, the bolder you are, the higher your profit factor, but probably the more nail biting that experience is. So it's really up to you. What you choose in the end. Maybe you're a little more conservative and you don't like big losses. You can see immediately that the ones that maybe risk a little less didn't quite do as well, but it's probably more tradable from a psychological standpoint. So these are all like considerations you might have, and this is great. Again, this is like an amazing way to just see all sorts of different combinations. You know, and again, I would definitely encourage you not to just play around with the entry rules, but definitely play around with the order management, where your profit targets sit, where your stop losses sit, and that I think you can get some really valuable information by doing so. Okay, so now let's get further into the optimizable parameters and more of an in-depth explanation in terms of how this works. Okay, so if you recall, I clicked on this optimizable settings. It pops up this window that allows me to select those parameters that we're going to be toying around with. And I'm going to show you kind of like what each of these correspond to. Okay, so I'm going to bring over the BloodHound interface for reference. On this side here, we have the BloodHound system that describes the entries. And we have indicators inside of the BloodHound template, and namely the RSI. Okay, so if I expand this, we will see the RSI here, and we can actually also play around with the period value and the smoothing value for the RSI. We can also, as we did earlier, play around with the period for the EMA. Okay, so that was the EMA that's inside of this solver, right? The one that was that sort of overall filter, right? So if I could bring the chart over just to remind you, that's this line here, right? We filtered again a situation where anytime we were above this EMA, we were looking for a short, and anytime we were below this EMA, we were looking for a long. Okay, and the solvers. So one of the things that we worked hard on was actually to give you full control over how those solvers are outputting its value. Okay, so if you're familiar with BloodHound, if I click on the RSI, this is the threshold solver, and again, this is to look for those situations where we're above this 70 line and below this 30 line, and those were the two threshold values. And I'm going to open up that threshold dialog so you can see what that looks like. These are the threshold rules for that particular solver. Okay, so again, this is the 30 and this is the 70. If you're familiar with the threshold solvers, you can add all sorts of additional rules to this. So if I go ahead and add another rule, let's make another, I'm not going to commit this, but you know, just for illustrative purposes, if I add a second rule here, you will actually get a second threshold rule that appears down here once this is all saved. Okay, so this particular piece here corresponds to this threshold rule here, right? And so we're looking at the long, and the value is 30. That's what this value is, okay? And so that's why I selected it, because I wanted to be able to play with that 30 line and vice versa down here, and I wanted to play with on the short side, the 70 line, right? And the output here corresponds to what the output value for the solver is. And remember, that's a number from 0 to 1. So if you're not too familiar with those, I would suggest maybe not playing with the output values. Generally speaking, you know, the important one is the value. Okay, so if I added even a range threshold here, and I was like, you know, I want to change this up, and instead of, you know, looking for values that are just simply below 30, maybe I want to look for values that are between 40 and 30 or something like that, right? I would put between 30 and 40 down here, right? And then what we'd see is a second threshold rule that pops up here with those two ranges on there. There's two values, value 1 and value 2, and you can play with those as well. Okay, so that's kind of BloodHound's optimizable parameters in a nutshell. Okay, now let's look at the corresponding BlackBird optimizable settings. And those all sit down here: the order sets, the money management, and the risk management. I'm just going to pull this over real quickly so that we have a quick reference here. But as you'll notice, we have 3 order sets: order set A, B, and C. And each one has a market entry, a profit target, and a stop loss. Inside of that, we have the placement. And this is the ATR setting that I was talking about before. So this is again a 2 ATR because that's a factor of 2, and it's an ATR 20. There is no tick offset, at least or set to 0, I should say. And the same thing is basically true with the stop loss. So we can look here. Okay, and we have an offset of 1.5, 0 ticks, and an ATR 20. So let's see what that actually looks like over here. right? So we have order sets A, B, and C. If I expand that, we have the tick offset, which is currently set to 0. We actually have the ATR period that you can play with, and the factor, which we did set. These ones don't actually, the indicator displacement and look back don't actually apply in this case. We also have the placement safeguards, which are safeguards to determine the minimum profit target and minimum stop loss distance, and maximum in some cases, which correspond to this setting up here. When I click this, you can see there's a min profit target distance and a min maximum profit target distance, etc. Okay, and so that actually exists for all 3 order sets, as you can see. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about quickly is the money management rules and the risk management rules. Now, the money management rules don't really apply to this particular system because we're looking at a daily trading system. And these are definitely more for the intraday type systems that you may be testing out. So if I pull up the money management rules, for example, I can set the maximum number of trades per day, the maximum number of consecutive wins and losses, etc., the maximum profit per day, and those are all things that you can toy around with in your optimizer. And these are great things to just, again, experiment with to see generally where you should be, right? If you ever wondered, how many trades should I take a day? How many winning trades should I take a day, et cetera, et cetera? Well, the great thing is you can now test it out and you can try it in the optimizer and generally have a good feel for this particular market and this particular instrument, what tends to work, right? And so this is again the possibilities that you can open up with the optimizer. So the other one is the risk management, and here we have the min risk reward ratio, and we can also play with this number here, when to exit when the trade losses exceed a certain amount. Again, keep in mind, because these are intraday values, the intraday settings, the backtester does sort of an approximation, right? So you can actually just be wary that when you're testing intraday systems, it's basically looking at on-bar close data. However, you can use tick replay. Just if you do use that, you have to have tick data loaded, but also be wary that that's going to dramatically increase the testing time, and I mean by a lot. So perhaps those are things you'd want to consider before doing those tests, or maybe do the quick version without tick replay first, hone in on kind of a good system before you go ahead and start using tick replay, because you can dramatically increase the computational cycles and to the point where it's pretty much unreasonable. So those are things to consider when you're doing your strategy analysis and you're playing around with the strategy analyzer and the BlackBird optimizer. I hope you got a taste for what's possible. And really, this is a tool to help you just let your imagination run wild and discover those trade systems that otherwise would have been really tedious to find. And these are great ways to hone in on the things that really count in your trade system. But more importantly, definitely think about optimizing over your order management, your money management rules as well, because those are things I think that that tend to be de-emphasized. When a lot of systems out there tend to emphasize the entries and perhaps even the exits, but those are all things that you can test on. And so I really hope you guys take this information and make something great out of it.